Computer. Hello.
Hi there.
Welcome to this new episode of Management 101. I'm your host, Max Winokur, and I have Spencer Fertig joining us today, who's going to tell us about being a manager and all that fun stuff. So before I introduce Spencer, I want to explain why Spencer is here today, besides he was available. No, I'm totally kidding. So Spencer is the CEO and co-founder of Bar None Games. He is also a good friend of mine. But back in the early days of our mutual tenures at Uber, he was also my manager for a few months. And we were both placed on a strike team working on DC driver incentives when we both, I seem to remember, didn't have anything else to do. And they wanted to find like a home for us. Was that right?
That's 100% right. Yeah.
Yeah, we were clearly very valued, or valuable rather. Spencer has been consistently one of the most thoughtful and caring people, as well as managers that I know.
That's
And
so sweet.
yeah, it's true. And as I've said, my goal with these interviews is to help others become better managers by learning from real world examples. So I've asked Spencer to join because he is one of the best managers I've worked with or for. So,
well, thank you. Wow. Crochet
I'm buttering you up.
How,
now I'm going to interrogate you.
This is about to take a turn. I know where this goes.
So some background on Spencer. So first, Spencer grew up in what we in the Northeast think of as rural backwoods. It is called New Jersey for those of you who are not familiar. Then he moved to the big city, Washington, D.C. for college, where he was, correct me if I'm wrong, the president of the co-op, which is the Georgetown.
I was the CFO of the Georgetown student
CFO.
grocery stores. Yeah.
Sorry, I promoted you by accident.
I wish.
Okay. Spent some time in iBanking, which I'm sure was thoroughly enjoyable. And then you joined Uber in 2013 as one of the first operations manager for the city of Washington, D.C. And fun fact, he interviewed me for my job as the operations manager for Baltimore when I applied a year later. And he almost didn't hire me because at the end of the interview, despite it being for Baltimore, I asked if there were other cities that I could work in. It was nothing against Baltimore. I just really wanted to fly instead of take the train. But Spencer took that the wrong.
But you had a broken arm or something, if I recall right. I think that was what.
That's true. I had just had surgery after throwing a baseball too hard. I had torn my shoulder labrum. I just had surgery, and my arm was stuck in the handshake position for my entire set of interviews with Uber. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing.
Management tip one is always hire someone with a broken arm.
Yeah, that's certainly weeds out the pool a little bit. There was a low point in Spencer's and my relationship when I accidentally stole his idea for a rider loyalty program.
Accidentally.
Spencer had the idea for DC, and then I was like, oh, this is a great idea. I want to roll it out for Baltimore. But did not really think through didn't really think through the steps of that, where I should have worked with Spencer instead of just going off on my own, given it was his idea. But since that nadir, as it were, we have made a comeback and are speaking again.
This is our first time speaking since that moment. So
yes,
listeners,
7 years later.
in July. Yep. Nice to see you again, Max.
Yeah, you too. So after that fabled incident, he went on to build Uber Everywhere and then launch Uber Eats on the West Coast. And then finally, his last role at Uber was running, besides our strike team, of course, was running the Pittsburgh market for rides. You were the GM of Pittsburgh for a little while there. And then and then you went to HBS, which for those not in the business is Harvard Business School. And then since then, you've been doing basically all startups, right?
Yes, that's been the life over the last 3.5 years.
Some have done well, some not so well. And today you're at one of the ones that's doing well. Actually, you started it. You run Bar None Games, which actually, instead of me talking about what Bar None Games is, would you mind telling us?
I'd be an honor.
Go for it.
Bar None Games offers live and interactive virtual, although now actually I guess it's hybrid and in-person as well. So team building events for companies that are looking to boost and sustain morale. So we have 5 different games we've built out. We have live professional hosts, team-based play, really focused on getting colleagues to talk and get to know each other and, develop bonds that ideally spill over not only in the game. Well, they don't spill over in the game, I guess, but spill over after the game, into sustained, morale and increased trust among team members. So it's been a blast.
It is a very fun experience. I have done it multiple times with teams of mine, and I can tell you months later we would still talk about the various trivia questions and who had won and who had lost, and still shit talk. So it was definitely a memorable experience, and I'm proud to say as well that I was one of the test users of the original product before it even launched, and I think I've referred multiple companies to Bar None. If I'm remembering,
is that your way of saying you're waiting for your referral gift cards?
Yeah, where's my Amazon gift card?
No, thank you, Max. You've been a huge help from day one, so I really appreciate it.
I'm just glad they got to have the experience. Cool. So now let's get into the interrogation portion of the interview. I'd love to hear a little bit about Bar None Games. So you're the co-founder and CEO. And you since you started it, like, what made you decide to start it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working, the year was 2020. The pandemic had just arrived on our shores, and I was working as head of operations at a Series B prop tech company. And my business school's 1-year reunion had gone remote. And
By the way, for those who are less knowledgeable, what does prop tech stand for?
Oh, I'm like, what is prop tech? It was technology in like the property management space. So I was working for a tech-enabled property management company.
Cool. Sorry to interrupt. Please.
No, sorry for using property management technology jargon on the pod. So I was at that company, and my business school's 1-year reunion went remote, and I wanted to keep my classmates connected. In some way. I was the president of my section, so I was kind of tasked with that. And I used to play bar trivia a lot, both in college and then at business school. For those who aren't familiar with bar trivia, it's what it sounds like. You show up to a bar with your friends and you play trivia, and you hopefully win a gift card if you're very good at trivia. And so leveraging Zoom technology and my weird trivia brain kind of created a game on the fly for about 70 classmates and didn't think much of it. And then after the game, had just a bunch of calls and text messages from classmates saying that it was the highlight of quarantine and would I host it for their companies. Again, this is like at the peak of quarantine. It's like May 2020. Everyone is just kind of adjusting to the new world. And so I started hosting games on the side. And then within a month or so, I was doing a fair amount of business and decided to take the plunge to grow it into the company that it is today.
Very cool. And how big is the company today in terms of employees or clients, however you measure size?
We just brought on our 6th full-time employee, I guess, including myself. So that's been really exciting. And then we have a team of over 60 hosts who are contractors, who are the face of Bar None and run our events. So yeah, the group is over 60 people. We've hosted at this point close to 3,500 games over the past 2.5 years. Which is really exciting. And I think one thing, a takeaway for me, not that you asked, but was I had started or attempted to start 2 startups prior to that did not work out. And Bar None was the first time where I wasn't looking for a company. I just kind of was doing something that I loved, that I think people needed, and it kind of grew organically from there. And so I guess it's a trite phrase, like it happens when you least expect it or when you're not looking for it or whatever some sage person said. But that was true for me. I was just kind of solving a problem that seemed like it needed solving, bringing people together.
I actually do think that applies very directly to management in terms of helping people figure out what they're best at rather than the thing that you're trying to push them into, right?
Totally.
It's all about the natural pathways and helping people move towards those. And I think same with entrepreneurship, right? You wanting to do this specific thing versus you seeing the problem out there and trying to solve it will have very different outcomes.
Totally. And that's kind of served me well for doing what you love. Things will kind of, when you're working on something that you love or are passionate about, I think you're going to work harder at that. You're going to be more creative in problem solving, and good things will flow from that. I was an American studies major in college. What I still don't even fully know what that was, but I knew I liked taking courses. in history and English and government and whatnot. And my GPA was good because I liked the stuff I was learning. And so that's kind of applied throughout my career, like working on problems that I'm passionate about. I find that I'm naturally inclined to work harder and be more creative and kind of solving.
Might we all have that opportunity to work on the things we love doing? I'm also happy to inform you that you have now grown to 6x the size of Max Winokur Consulting LLC. So congratulations on your torrid pace of growth.
Well, you've still got 2.5 years to catch up. Yeah.
Okay, but one more general question before we get into some specific management topics. What is the biggest managerial challenge that you have faced as a founder?
Yeah, we're starting up with toughies. It's kind of meta because our company is designed to solve this very problem. I mean, I guess it makes sense to have a company designed to solve the problems you're facing. But even though we are designed to bring joy to the remote world, my biggest challenge is managing a team remotely. So I don't know if we're getting into this today or not, but so much of, I think, how I was able to generate goodwill as a manager and how I facilitate, work to foster positive culture on teams was through in-person interactions, like moments that you have, little moments where you show support or, host culture building things. And that can be tough on Zoom because I'm, bar none, as a remote first company, all of my interactions with my team are normally centered around like being on Zoom and talking through like business problems or issues or growth opportunities. And so I think we've come up with a bunch of ways to bring that joy into the Zoom world, but we have to be a lot more intentional about that. And that is a challenge as it relates to my natural managerial style, which is often based on like asking people if they want to grab a coffee or a drink or just, exchanging nice comments. It's harder to do in the remote world.
Totally. It is hard to bring your entire team to Outback Steakhouse in a remote world.
That's how I maintained my NPS. It was purely Bloomin' Onion.
Yeah. It was also not a close Outback Steakhouse to downtown Washington, D.C. It was somewhere in like deep Loudoun County, Virginia, if I remember correctly.
Totally. It was a good thing we worked for a company that enabled us to order cars on demand to take us to random places. Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. So now we're going to get into the management specific topics and questions. And I have set this up to focus on things that I think Spencer is particularly good at. So hopefully you have some interesting answers to these questions.
We'll see if I agree. Yeah. Excited to see what comes up.
Okay, so first topic is honest feedback with empathy. So this is something I think Spencer does really well as a manager, giving tough feedback in a way that is both respectful and caring. I've certainly experienced this myself from Spencer, and I know other people who've reported to him have it. I think this is a hard line to toe. There are a lot of managers who end up in the, as Radical Candor calls it, the ruinous empathy box, which is not being honest, but also not caring. And then there are others who sort of fall in the obnoxious aggression, which is too brutally honest and not caring, right? So Spencer finds this happy medium between caring and also challenging directly, which is the ideal spot to be in. And so I'm curious if this is just something you were like born with, or if this is something that developed over time.
Whoa, yeah. Well, thank you, Max, for flagging that. It's interesting that that's the thing that you flag my management style, because at Uber in the early midday, like this was something that was called out to me that I was not good at, or the empathy I was always good at, but the honesty I struggled with in the early days. And actually, there was a time when I was up for promotion at Uber, and I thought I was going to get it, and then I almost did not, because the feedback that I had provided, I had submitted like 2 positive feedback for my team, like without calling out growth areas or, giving constructive feedback. And a manager who I will not name, but if they're listening to the podcast knows exactly who they are, gave me some feedback that in the moment stung, but but ended up being very helpful going forward, which is just that, in trying to fueling a positive culture doesn't mean only complimenting people. And in not telling some of my reports the things that they were doing wrong or could be doing better that were top of mind, I was depriving them of the opportunity to address those and move on to the next level. Like if I didn't say it, it didn't mean that it was also going to disappear from my head that I thought that people weren't actually doing X thing well, but it did mean that they weren't going to have the opportunity to be on the same page with me and then have the, chance to kind of like correct that. So I shied away from providing direct feedback until that point. And I think that has really served me well, again, because you have to give people the opportunity to address, areas for growth. And many people that I've had on my teams are super capable of rising to the occasion and surpassing it, as long as they're aware of what their, strengths and growth areas are. And then the last thing I'll say on this though is, and Max, you kind of hit the nail on the head, like pairing this with empathy is so important. I know, in business school, we learned a lot of Ray Dalio radical candor philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there are a lot of schools of thought that are just like, be as direct as possible. And I think that you can, speak the truth and give people honest feedback without being like mean or overly critical. And that's something that I've just, not seen a lot of managers adopt in the past. And it just leads to poor team NPS, just an unhappy or fearful culture. And I think life's too short to kind of be fueling those environments.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it's easy to not say anything, right? Like obviously those kind of conversations are much harder. But think about it from the direct reports perspective. They would, of course, prefer to know about these areas of development, right? Like you said, you're literally depriving them of the opportunity to improve by not telling them what they need to improve on. But it's important to also not jump over to the other side of, I'm just going to say it without thinking about how I say it, because how you say it is, if anything, more important. It can either turn someone off or make them motivated.
Yep, absolutely. And I always think about Barack Obama a lot, but I'm always in awe. I feel like with presidents
just in
now,
general in your brain.
I just think every day I wake up and I think about Barack Obama. But I was always in awe of how after every other administration over the last 50 plus years, like operatives have left and published tell-all books for Democrats, for Republicans, and there were so few, if any, about Barack Obama, even though he accomplished results, whether you agree with them like I passionately do or don't. And I feel like so much of that is just because, it proves to me that it is not impossible to get results out of a team while still treating them empathetically and humanely and with positive vibes.
Yeah, agreed. You'll certainly keep them around for longer. What, let's say that you're a founder who's just trying to sort of find their voice in giving honest feedback without upsetting people unnecessarily and really trying to motivate them instead. How could someone replicate your approach?
Yeah, I think two things for me about this approach that, again, did not come naturally to me. And so it's something I've worked at over time. One is when giving this feedback is to separate the task from the person and to make sure that people, that your reports know that you're kind of identifying things they can be doing better rather than making a value judgment on them as an individual. I think one, that's 90+% of the time, the feedback I'm giving anyway, it's action oriented and not person oriented. And secondly, it makes the feedback a lot easier for someone to receive and want to implement when it doesn't feel like a value judgment against them as a person. And then the second thing is not something that I do tactically in the moment of giving the feedback, but it's just the way that I treat people day to day is with kindness, with empathy, with the assumption of positive intent. And I think if you treat your reports well over the course of your time with them, it enables them to know that you're coming from a good place when you give this feedback. And so when I give this feedback, I think my reports know that I'm doing this because I want them to get to the next level and because we're working together on a mission that we're passionate about, and not because it makes me happy to like put people down or give direct.
Or you want to hold them back for some reason.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's definitely right. Building that trust enables you to have that conversation. So it's almost like if the first time you're thinking about this is when you need to have this conversation, you've already lost, right?
Totally.
You need to have spent time building trust and building relationships such that that person can hear you for what you're trying to say and not make bad assumptions around your intentions.
For sure. And Mac, you go.
Oh, go ahead. No, please.
Okay, I'll go. No, but the thing you're saying is also reminding me is, making sure that these things, like no one, and I think it's the stuff that's been mentioned before, but no one should be surprised on a performance review by anything that they're reading. And if they are, that's your fault as a manager. And so also making sure that you're holding regular one-on-ones with your team members, or that you are that the leaders reporting to you are holding one-on-ones with, their team members, so that nothing is
Absolutely.
catching anyone by surprise, at the end of the year, and that they have time to kind of work on the things that you're flagging.
Absolutely. Yeah. If it's just happening at the end of the year, then they didn't even have really time to correct it. It's more just like a documentation exercise, which is not helpful for anyone. The other thing that you said is focusing on the action rather than the person. Like, I'm separating what happened from who you are, right? I really like the approach of saying this is what happened rather than you did this, right? Like, because it helps people not feel accused. If I say, Spencer, you really pissed me off, well, your like nervous system is going to kind of go into overdrive by default, right? Because
Totally.
you're going to feel a threat. Whereas if I say, Spencer, that text made me really upset, well, now it's not you doing it, it's the text message. And sure, maybe you sent that text message, but it's this text message that's causing me problems, not Spencer directly. And those two statements are very different, even if they seem similar.
100%.
So
I'm gonna have
watch out for
you
those
say
text
things,
messages.
no, you everything you kind of say the things you package it so much better than when it comes out of. I guess that's why you're host. I guess that's why you're the podcast host.
Well, no, it's why I speak second, so I get to summarize rather than stay from the beginning. You're the originator. Okay, we're going to do an exercise now.
Okay.
I would love for you to give me some honest but hopefully caring feedback. So
Okay.
I have an example in mind. You have mentioned in the past that I post on LinkedIn a lot, and
In
now
jest.
let's use it as an example anyway. Now, let's say you are the owner of Max Weniker Consulting LLC. We've now doubled our staff size to 2, and I am reporting to you. You think that me posting on LinkedIn is hurting my ability to focus on whatever it is that you need me to actually be doing as an employee. Can you give me this feedback in a way that keeps me motivated?
I'm going to try. I guess you'll be the judge of that. Let me think. So
I'll let you know how motivated I am afterward or for closing up shop permanently.
Please do. I don't think there's like one tried and true way to approach this. I think there are definitely core tenets I have of my management philosophy. And one of those tenets, honestly, is just like, make sure I'm coming from a good place and that my team members know I'm coming from a good place. And if something works, great. And if not, like, we can pivot. Like, most stuff isn't like firmly set in stone. So for the record here, I think for your business, like, the posting makes sense and is great. I too post a lot on LinkedIn. Thank you for not withholding some of your judgment there. So I can fully empathize as a small business owner. But I'm going to dive into this. I'm going to accept the premise and dive in anyway.
Okay.
So I think I don't know if we're doing full role play here, but I would ask questions to understand why you're posting on LinkedIn. I think a thing that also did not come naturally to me in the beginning that one of my Uber managers really instilled in me was the assumption of positive intent and making sure that's like front of mind. So before I went into cease and desist mode, I would ask you why you're doing it and see if your reason resonates with me.
So you're thinking that there may be something that you don't know that I'm going to communicate to you.
Yeah, maybe there's something I'm missing. And I do think a little bit here, it also what matters. What matters is potentially the seniority of the person that you're managing. So if I am like at a director or senior director level managing directors or senior managers who have years of experience, like, there is a good chance or a solid chance that they know something about the thing that they're dealing with that I don't. I guess in this case, it's Max Weniker pure consulting, but say we've hit the 6 FTE thing and it's not just one, like, maybe you're a lot more knowledgeable about an area of the business than I am, and you know something that I don't know. I think if I'm a manager managing an analyst or an associate who is newer and might not have as much, expertise, maybe I would be a little less, lenient here. But for managing, mid-level managers, I would want to know if you know something that I don't. So that would be one. But say you don't.
Fair.
Say you
I know nothing.
Right, or your reason doesn't resonate. So number one is assume positive intent and give you the room. Say your reason doesn't resonate, though. I think part B would be me saying something like, look, Max, like, are we aligned on the main goal at hand here, which I presume is to help as many people as possible while growing a profitable business? And if we are, I'd say, Max, you and I, because we're in business together, we both care about work-life balance. So we're going to like work hard and we're going to be working for, 40, 45 hours a week. And then beyond that, we're not working for like 80, 90 hours a week. So it's not like we can run every single possible growth avenue to ground. And in that world where we have like a finite use of time and resources, I think that working on thing X, which would literally be anything other than posting on LinkedIn, could be more valuable than the way you're spending your time right now. So can you try a few weeks of focus on X rather than posting on LinkedIn? Let's agree on what metric we're looking to move. And then let's circle back here in 2 weeks or a month or whatever a reasonable and not excessive time is to kind of focus on. It's almost like setting up an experiment, right? To prove out what I think is right. And then we can come back and assess. And the last thing I'll say there, because I'm already sick of the sound of my own voice, is that there are a few moments where I'm really experienced and feel very certain of something. And there, I think, as a manager, maybe it behooves you to speak declaratively so that you can save everyone time. But even in the feedback I'm giving you right now, like what it's aimed at doing is creating joint ownership of this process. Like, I trust you. I also have a hunch. Let's test this out together and then we'll revisit it. And if I'm wrong, I'm more than willing to own up to the fact that I'm wrong and we can resume LinkedIn posting or try to find an option Z that works better.
Yeah, I like that. It's leaving it open-ended to, hey, I'm not 100% certain of the result, but I do want to change courses and see how it goes, rather than I know what you're doing is wrong and I know what I want you to do is right. And those two things are going to be received very differently. I get to now respond and say, okay, like, we'll try it the way that you want me to do it and we'll see how it goes, rather than if Spencer thinks I'm doing bad and I need to stop, right? So the outcome of changing the course of action is the same, but you kept me engaged and excited. And I'm happy to report I will not be closing the business now.
I was going to ask you, Max, on the receiving end, like, does that resonate, or would something have resonated more? Like, how would you respond to feedback like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I personally benefit a little bit from the feedback sandwich, which I know is generally considered a no-no. But for me, just receiving only critical feedback makes me, even if this is not the manager's intention, sometimes can make me assume that, like, I've done something really wrong. And so I like receiving some positive feedback on either side, just to say, like, hey, like, there are good things too going on. Other people really prefer it quite directly. I think you actually sort of like towed the line between those two things well. So I felt okay about it. I felt like you were not saying, hey, posting on LinkedIn is a bad idea. You're just saying there might be better uses of your time, which it's hard for me to argue with. And we're going to get data to see how it goes.
Yeah. And I think you're right, Max. I mean, the key to management is knowing that there's not a one size fits all philosophy, and being in tune with your reports to understand which prefer autonomy or feeling like they have a hand in the process. And there are some reports who are just going to be like, I like following instructions and executing on those, and I just need a clear roadmap.
Tell me what to do.
Totally. And for those reports, maybe I would be a bit more direct in like, let's put LinkedIn posting to the side and do option B for X weeks, and then let's kind of circle back up.
Right. Yeah. There are some people who've reported to me who, if I gave them the feedback sandwich, they'd be like, just tell me what's wrong. Right.
Yeah.
And they'd want me to get to the point. And so, yeah, definitely important to keep that how the individual wants to receive that feedback in mind. All right. Last question on honest and empathetic feedback. Tell me about a time that you received non-empathetic feedback and it demotivated you.
Yeah. For my first 2 years at a bank, I had a boss who I'm since on good terms with, but in those moments of their career, managed through a lot of just yelling and putting people down. And so it was basically 2 years. And it was kind of interesting. I'm self-deprecating, Max, as you know, the listeners may not know. So I don't normally compliment myself, but I was a good performer at this bank. Like my performance review, I was like in the top bucket, and yet I would get screamed at on an open pit floor every single day for 2 years, which had really negative effects on my mental health, my physical health, my sense of self-worth. And I just remember feeling
probably your hearing as well.
Exactly. What'd you say?
Probably your hearing.
My what?
Well,
I got you.
Sorry. Very well played. I'm gonna go home now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the episode. But I it's a top 5 moment of my life in resonance, not in happiness. And I just remember feeling so strongly, if I'm ever in a position where I'm managing someone or people in the future, I will never make them feel the way that I feel now. And that has been what was a very negative experience, has been my single guiding light as a manager in the decade that has passed since then, and that I will carry with me, until my dying day or my last work day, which I hope are not the same day. But yeah.
You're not going to die doing what you love, huh?
Yeah, well, I mean, unless it's
hosting online
unless it's
trivia.
eating cheese fries. Yeah, exactly.
If you can get paid for that, that's another story. That's a great example. Unless you work in a very high noise environment or in a sporting environment, I don't really see any reason for yelling. I can't recall a time where I've yelled at a direct report, nor would I ever wish to. I don't think I can recall a time where a manager has yelled at me, nor would I ever think it was appropriate. And I think this example is a really good one because you said, like, I got to know this person more later on, and like we are on good terms, and you think of them as a good person. I'm guessing you didn't necessarily feel that way at the time. And is that right?
Yeah, and I think this person's grown since then. But yes, no, I did not. If you're listening, I'm sorry, but it wasn't cool. What you did wasn't cool, and you know it.
You might be thinking to yourself as a manager, like, oh, I'm a good person. Like, my team knows that. And it's very possible for the perception of you to be different than who you are. And bridging that gap is really important.
I think 2 other really quick things there, and
just
that spring to mind. One is just that I'm now older. I'm 33. And that manager was in their late 20s at the time. And I do think that there is this feeling among mid-level managers that or among some, that you can somehow convey strength and conviction through yelling or being forceful. And I think that's a no-no. And does more harm than good. And the second thing I'd say is, as harmful as being yelled at by this person every day, and that's not hyperbole, like I was the fact that we sat on an open pit floor of hundreds of people and no one ever intervened. There was like this complicitness, as if like that was acceptable and could be, and was an okay way to treat people. And so the other thing I think as a manager is not just what you owe your team, but if you're seeing something not appropriate go down in the workplace, saying something. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, the old TSA refrain. I totally agree with that. Sometimes it's really difficult for the victim in these situations to be able to speak up, right? So couldn't agree more. I think you and I are both, on a personal note, very big proponents of therapy. And I like, I've looked at a lot of managers in my past and thought, I think a lot of people in management positions could probably benefit from some therapy, right? If someone is using yelling as the technique to motivate their team or direct their team, like that came from some form of interaction in their childhood that they've decided is appropriate. And like, if we could just like dig that up a little bit and help everyone get to a better place with their mental health, a lot less of that would happen, right?
Totally. You are yeah, exactly. It's like you're screaming at me. I think this is not about the bullet point that I just put next to the stock price chart right now. Yeah.
I don't think the size 13 versus size 12 font was really what's at the heart of this issue. New topic. Okay. Positive team culture. Yeah. Shake it out. This will be less interrogative, I think.
Okay.
So, Spencer, you have another unique skill, which is your ability to make people enjoy themselves. And one of the things you already mentioned that you do is a lot of self-deprecating humor. And if you're listening to this podcast, you've heard some of his one-liners, some more witty than others. And I think it's hard to find someone on a team of Spencers that doesn't enjoy that environment. And certainly, if you look around, just anyone thinks of all the teams they've worked on, they're not all enjoyable environments. So someone like Spencer, who consistently creates an enjoyable environment, is very unique. So let's start with just the broader picture. There are a lot of managers who are just focused on the work and a lot less than you on the experience that people are having within their team. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say 2 things. One is, during my time at Uber, like when I was in a general management role or a senior manager role overseeing teams, the stat that I was single most concerned about was my manager NPS. So for anyone not
Hmm.
familiar, NPS is Net Promoter Score, where they ask people a question. I think it was like, would you recommend someone work for
That's
Spencer?
right.
And if someone ranked it on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, if someone ranked it a 9 or a 10, they were a promoter. If it was like a 0 through 6, they were a detractor. If they ranked you a 7 or 8, it was neutral, and they would take your promoters and subtract your detractors. And if you want to learn more, Google NPS. But the point is that it was a metric to gauge, whether how well your team, would recommend you or liked you. And so my lowest, I was a 25, 26-year-old manager at Uber, and my lowest NPS score was a 72. And I didn't have a detractor, and it would range between like 72 and low 80s. And it was over double the average Uber manager. And it even gets uncomfortable for me to say positive things about myself. Like, that's something I struggle with. But I was laser focused on this, and our team, I know because I remember, outperformed other markets on revenue and new users each week and blah blah blah. But I can't tell you any of those numbers. Like, all I remember is my NPS. So the two things that I would say to managers is, one, there is a hugely indirect and direct impact that comes from your team enjoying working for you, because it does make them not have the Sunday scaries and be excited, or at the very least not dreading coming to work on Monday. That will spill over into the work that they do, which will, if you are a good manager and directing people to work on the right things, will spill over into positive business results. So one is like, how you treat people is absolutely related to how your team performs on the business metrics. The second thing I would say is, even if you don't buy that, if you're like, Spencer, that doesn't resonate with me, I disagree, but I respect all opinions. But I would also just say that, like, there's more to life than work, and that is something I just feel so in my bones. Like, life is short, and I really feel like work doesn't love you back, but people do. And the moment for me where this really clicked was, I spent 4 years at Uber. It was an amazing experience. I learned so much, was given so much growth opportunities, and I left Uber on May 1st. And I thought I would get to keep my credits like for the month. And by May 2nd, and I also kind of thought, like, in my head, like, all the cars would stop working. Like, I was such a fundamental part. It was so hard for me to picture Uber running, which
Yeah, the
sounds,
dispatch wouldn't happen because it was just marionette puppeteering cars and drivers and people.
I know someone should have Mike Isaac interview me, but what like I mean, as I say it, it sounds like kind of egotistical. And then you wake up on May 2nd, and you order an Uber, and every car's working, and I'm Uber pooling my butt around DC. But all of these, so the business keeps running and has been around and will outlive me, hopefully. But my friendships, at my wedding 6 months ago, there were probably 15 people from Uber there, and
Yep.
those friendships, and those people sustain me. So there's just more to life than business results, and relationships are one of those.
I was only personally there for the great Italian food that was served, but sure, point well taken. And I agree with you. Maya Angelou said, people won't remember what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I think that's absolutely right. When people interview me and they ask me about my Uber experience, like in a job interview, for example, I sometimes have a hard time remembering the exact metrics that we achieved in terms of number of rides or number of drivers or whatever it was, right? But I very vividly remember my experiences with my managers and my teams, and of course those relationships last a lot longer and are far more impactful to me as an individual and as a professional than whether we achieved 100,000 of this or 110,000 of that. So totally agree. Now, let's say you're a manager and you now agree with, let's say that there is a manager who what before was like, nah, I'm not about the people. And now they've heard you speak and they've heard the gospel and they're like, oh man, I really need to like engage my team and build a better team culture. What are some easy ways that a manager could go about doing that from scratch?
Yeah. Well, first off, I would say to any of those managers, I'd say, welcome to the April 4th Club, as Maya Angelou and I were both born on April 4th. We're
Wow.
excited
Okay. That's a fun fact.
Fun fact. So a few quick tactical tips that kind of come to mind. First is just being willing to get in the trenches with your team and show that you're willing to do like some of the grunt work. It, one, makes you a more accessible manager, but two, gets you a lot more in touch with the problems that your team is facing, so that you're not out of touch when you're asking for things. I think team members will say one of the worst things is when a boss asks you to do something without any sense of how much time that's going to take. And so the more you're willing to get in there, I think gives you makes you seem not disconnected or like delusional.
Absolutely.
Two, obviously from the CEO of Bar None Games, but you've got to make time for team building.
Shameless
even pre
plug.
the bar, shameless plug, exactly. BarNoneGames.com. You can self-serve book within under 2 minutes. But I mean, the reason I started this company is because I believe that like in my bones, and I remember on the Uber Everywhere team or the DC team or whatever, all the teams I ran at Uber, like consciously setting aside time for days or after work activities to celebrate key metrics or milestones that we hit as a team, as well as like when I was working late nights with the team, saying like everyone want to grab a drink or just making sure I ate lunch with the team to really have those moments to connect outside of the work. Third thing I would say, and we mentioned this earlier, Max, is just making sure you hold regular one-on-ones with your team to check in. And more than that, or as much as that, is making sure those one-on-ones build off the previous one-on-ones to show that you're listening to what your reports are saying and progressing with them. So like I, would keep pretty diligent notes in my weekly one-on-ones with the reports. And when we would come into the next one-on-one, we would pick up with where we left in the last one-on-one. So it didn't feel like people were just showing up to just say stuff and check something off a list, but we were really tracking progress on both tactical business goals as well as professional development. And the last thing I would say is the importance for me of giving your team what I call structured autonomy. So laying forth a vision that everyone in your team is bought into and excited about, having each person on your team know how their work is going to feed into the ability to achieve said vision, and then giving people the autonomy within those bounds to run with it and not just be carrying out, executing on like an extremely tactical checklist so they just feel like a trained monkey. And so those are a few things I think people could do off the bat to build an engaging team culture.
Those are all fantastic. I think what you said about one-on-one documentation is weirdly important. I can tell you, having had experiences with managers that did not keep notes around like what we talked about, and managers who came to my one-on-one with an agenda and tracking items that we discussed last time, the feeling that I had of how important I was very different, right? Yep. In one, it's just like, okay, it's whatever I want to talk about, and like this manager doesn't really care. In the other, it's this manager is clearly engaged and wants to continue the progress or make progress on what we've been working on the entire time. And I think the other thing is around structured autonomy. It's there's very little that's more demotivating than being told exactly what to do, right? Yep. If I'm just here to click a button in the way that you told me to click that button, that's really unenjoyable and not very fulfilling. And you're gonna have a lot of turnover in the team, or certainly just like very low engagement, and they're not going to go the extra mile. But when you say not here's how to get this done, but rather just here's where we need to get to, and I'm going to support you in you figuring out how we get there, you as a manager defining the what and not the how, then you're giving the autonomy to the team to say, okay, like I'm the one who knows the most, and I can figure out how to get this done. It's a lot like parenting in some ways. Like if you micromanage your child, like they're never going to learn anything, and they're certainly not going to be very happy. Whereas if you say like, let's figure out how to get where you're going together, that's a very different interaction and a very different relationship that you have with that person.
Totally. Couldn't agree more.
Cool. All right. Last question here. Have you ever had a manager that was really amazing at building a positive team culture? What did they do?
Yeah. Now I get to not speak on people in code. Leah Raber. I hope you're out there. Leah Raber was a manager that I had at Uber who was my manager when I was launching Uber Eats markets out west. And just kind of taught me this concept of structured autonomy and how to hold awesome one-on-ones. Just, showed up to our meetings every week, super prepared, built on our previous conversations, also just asked like, I think that when sometimes managers, I think, can try to flex in these meetings and try to prove that they're smart, or they'll give you like lectures on why you're wrong or whatever. And Leah would just ask these short, powerful questions, which I also think is a great managerial technique to help people like unlock within themselves the answers rather than just kind of dictating answers to people. Would go out with me for coffees and lunches and drinks, which again isn't saying that as a manager you need to like constantly dine with your coworkers, but just put in the work to make me feel like she cared about me as a person, not just as an employee. Yeah, gave me the ability to roam within a set of bounds, that I knew what I was doing, and just she inspired me to kind of try to grow into the manager that I'm trying to become. So Leah Raber, wherever you are, thank you. I know I'm not the only one who feels that way, and
that's amazing.
You're awesome. Yeah.
The point you made around managing the whole person is a really important one. I think there are a lot of ways to be a good manager. There are also, of course, a lot of ways to be a really terrible manager. But one of the consistent ways that I've never heard anyone do otherwise is, in being a good manager, some of what you need to do is understand that this person is not just a producer of widgets in the context of your work hours, right?
Yeah.
This person also has a personal life and feelings and experiences that happen outside the workplace that dramatically impact how they act and perform professionally. And you are only going to be successful as a manager insofar as you understand that about them and demonstrate interest in that. Now, that's not to say you need to like dig into the details of their personal lives, but creating a space where there is the opportunity to interact as human beings and not just professionals is definitely important.
Yep, absolutely. Another person, this will only be relevant to me and Max and maybe a few people, but our friend Annalisa is probably one of the best managers that I've ever.
That's exactly who I was thinking of.
Annalisa Rosenfeld, very few people who I feel like we got hired in the same week, and then there was like a moment where I was working for her, and anyone else, I feel like this would have like destroyed me, and it was like the most enjoyable managerial experience of my life. So she's, I don't know, just feels like a relevant place to call her out. Also, is a great example.
Annalisa is a fantastic manager. She was mine as well for a short period of time on the Maryland team. I have sent many people her way who were looking for a good manager at Uber.
Totally.
We had a whole other topic, but we have only 3 minutes, so I'm going to skip it and just take a step back for a moment and just ask, like, what is, and by the way, I'm putting you totally on the spot and didn't even give you this question in advance to think about remotely. So it's okay if you have no answer. We'll just cut it out entirely of the podcast. We'll just have this.
I'm mad at you that now people know I had some of the other questions in advance.
I think that's pretty normal.
It's so normal. My genius was premeditated.
Oh, by the way, before we get to that, one other thing you mentioned was around asking questions of your direct reports. There's a great book called The Coaching Habit, whose whole premise is your job as a manager is to ask questions, not give answers, right? Your job as a manager is to help other people figure things out, not tell them what to do. And there are 7 questions that unlock people's brains. And the first one is just what's on your mind. So I really like starting a one-on-one with that. Just like, what's on your mind? Because instead of saying like, what do we need to talk about? It's just opening up and saying, tell me what's going on in your brain. And then instead of saying, okay, I know how to solve that problem, the question is like, what are some options for how we could solve that problem? And then you're asking them to solve it. And they probably have a lot better ideas than you do because they have a lot more context than you do.
Totally. I'm writing that down myself. The coach, I'm ordering this right after this podcast.
Oh man, I wish I had a referral link. I feel like I've mentioned this multiple times in my podcast. I should really reach out to the author. It's a great book. Anyway, let's say for a moment that a manager comes to you and is like, just like, I have no idea how to be a good manager. Like, what's just like one thing that I can do to better connect with my team, or like just start being a good manager? My NPS scores are very negative and I want to change that.
What would I say? I mean, people, I think I used it. I'd say people first, or I would say I would repeat the line that I said, which is just that work doesn't love you back, people do. And I think anything you can do to just focus on cultivating positive relationships in a work context with your reports and trusting that that is the right way to live life and will spill over into positive business effects will get you, kind of on the right foot.
I like that. Also, you get the side benefit of potentially being invited to their wedding. So
not a bad, I know.
There's literal incentive.
Right. So there you go. Every manager, your goal should be invited to each of your reports' weddings.
All right. Well, we are out of time. Thank you, Spencer Fertig, for joining me today. Appreciate all of your insight on being a great manager. And if we can replicate you a little bit out there in the world, we'll have a lot more good managers. So thank you. for sharing your
Thank you
wisdom.
so much for having me on. I'm so proud of you, Max, and this podcast, and can't wait to be invited back for part two. I'm sure the
We
listeners
have a
are
whole
already
topic we haven't gotten
craving
to
that.
yet.
Exactly.
All right. Enjoy your week and good luck on getting Taylor Swift tickets.
Yeah, prayers up.
See ya.